We're gonna do something, a new feature for the RLD. This is actually a two-parter. We're actually gonna from time to time look at a particular year in rugby league, check out what was going on, go through all the ins and outs. So we're gonna start with 1987.
I'm so pumped for this. This is the year that I really got into footy.
And this is why we're doing this first. So you're slightly older than me. My first active season was 1988, so that will be the next one we do. But beyond that, I'm open to ideas. So any listener suggestions, I welcome them. Anyone who suggests 1999 will be instantly banished from the RLD fraternity.
If any flog or gronk sends that in.
But I should say at the start, this should be viewed as a bit of a companion piece to the earlier history corners we did on the birth of the Brisbane Broncos, and also the mini one we did on the Ray Price and Wally Lewis books.
In my opinion, the Brisbane Broncos History Corner is the finest work you have done.
Okay, well, hopefully this one can go some way to matching that, because really, really interesting season of football, 1987. And before I started researching it, I always considered it this kind of anomaly in the 80s. You had this like Parramatta Canterbury domination, and I never really reckoned with it, but I think 1987 was really a year where things in rugby league started to change. It was a real turning point.
Well, it certainly was, given that you had the last Sydney Cricket Ground grand final, and then you went to the SFS the year after. That was the big generational switch.
One of many with
Tina Turner.
Yeah, the last year of the traditional Sydney comp with obviously the new teams coming in. So just to lay it out, what we're going to do tonight is have a look at the landscape in general, talk a bit about some of the things that were going on, and then next week we'll focus particularly on the on-field action with a focus on the grand finalists, Manly and Canberra.
A cliffhanger.
Yeah.
A Cliffy Lines hanger.
So I thought the best way to set this up was to just touch on a bit of what was going on field, with a look at the Dally M race, and then also the Rugby League Week Players Poll. So we'll start with the Dally M's. This was won by Peter Sterling that year. Capping it, we've got some Sterlo talk at the back end of this week's episode, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. But an amazing 2-year stretch for Sterlo. 1987, he won the Dally M Halfback of the Year, won the Rothmans, won the Golden Boot, won the Rugby League Week Player of the Year. This was coming off in 1986, where he won the Dally M, won the Rugby League Week Player of the Year. By all accounts, was robbed of a Rothmans. He scored a Rugby League Week 10 in both seasons, the first player to ever get 2 of those.
He was definitely the premier player at that time, and that's all you'd hear about.
And you got to remember, this is coming off a run where he'd already won a Dally M in 84. He'd already won the 3 comps with Para. Like, when you think about Sterlo's peak and his run, like, it's an 8-year run of greatness.
Can't get a look in for the Immortals.
Yeah. So I don't want to, relitigate this for the 1000th time. There was another great article about Alfie Langer's case for immortality during the week. So I don't want to get bogged down in that, but just want to say, like, what a couple of years from Sterlo.
And you left out the biggest cherry on top, the trip to Long Beach for the Origin.
I didn't leave that out at all. We're getting to that. So Sterlo won the Dally M. Craig Holman was actually leading when the vote went behind doors, and subsequently didn't poll a vote for the rest of the year, and ended up being pipped for second and third place as well as first, with Clayton Friend and Terry Lamb getting the minor positions.
Clayton Friend for Norths, was it?
Yeah. So that was on field. The players poll, as always, threw up some juicy stuff. I love with that players poll, there was always one controversial thing every year.
Yeah.
This one, I guess the big story was that 40% of players answered with a yes to the question, are drugs used by players to improve performance?
That was in the heyday of like amphetamines and that sort of gear, and steroids were just coming in.
Yeah.
And it was considered like a bit of a gamesmanship edge
vibe
at that point.
Yeah, but it was beyond the innocence of earlier eras where players were just given a pep pill and didn't really think about it. Like, players in this era knew what they were doing to a greater extent. Another question posed: what was the biggest problem in the game, in the modern game? And so the greatest single problem was others. So that was 41% just said, things not listed. But of the named issues, can you guess what the number one problem was? Referees. And some novel suggestions on how to fix the problems in the refereeing ranks, Andrew. I just want to get your opinion on whether you think these ideas would have worked. Most players claim they need help, either by video replays or an extra referee on the field.
Oh my God. Let's go back to one ref.
Keep in mind that many of the people crying out to go back to the old system were players playing in this era. And the players named the best players in each position: Gary Jack at fullback, Slippery Morris on the wing, Michael O'Connor in centre, Terry Lamb 5'8", Sterlo at halfback, Wayne Pearce lock, Les Davidson second rower, Peter Tunks prop, and Mal Cochran the hooker.
Mal Cochran had a season that year, didn't he?
Yeah, I think he won the Rothmans maybe the year before, but he was he was up there for a while. And you mentioned that it was the last year of the SCG hosting rugby league on a regular basis, the last grand final there. Until is it next year we're playing a grand final at the SCG?
Are we really?
Yeah.
Are we serious?
We are, yeah. That's what they're doing with not having the SFS and Homebush available.
Not Suncorp?
No.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I hate that. So the move from the SCG wasn't really lamented by current players. Paul Sirenen's comment is kind of across the board what the players thought. The ground's atrocious. When we played in the semis last year, it was a block of granite. By the end of the semis last year, I had grazes all over me. The ground was so hard. And this year, as soon as it rains, the ground is a bog, which was the eternal story for the life of rugby league at the SCG. And yet, despite that, 20 former players who were polled, 14 were outraged at the idea of moving from the SCG. Johnny Raper said, "A lot of my blood was spilled out there on grand final day, and I'm very much opposed to the change."
I'm glad we're not listening to Johnny Raper for moving the game forward.
Interestingly, Arthur Summons and Norm Proven were both in the minority, being that they did favour the change. Summons unreservedly saying he didn't want nostalgia to get in the way of progress.
Those guys have always been level-headed and intelligent, and it's an honour to have them on the trophy.
Yeah.
For that reason.
Oh, without a doubt. And the other thing about the SFS was it was also the end of Redfern Oval as a first-grade venue, with Souths moving to the SFS full-time in 1988. And there was an article in the Sydney Morning Herald kind of lamenting the loss of Redfern Oval. And the writer David Rowland said, "A couple of signs around the ground said it all. Vale, R.I.P. Redfern, was plastered to the canteen wall." I think his later quote in this article says it all, really. "If you haven't got red and green eyes, it's extremely hard to imagine why anyone would be so attached to a stingy, miserable-looking place like Redfern Oval. The facilities are disgraceful, an insult to players, officials, supporters and the media. One commentator described the Oval as man's inhumanity to man." How can you write that sentence and then say, "No, everything's changed"?
Well, we're talking about Brookvale Oval tonight, and we're in the same spot as they were back then with that. Rose-coloured glasses have killed more rugby league initiatives than anything.
We're going to hear a lot more rose-coloured glasses talk over the course of this history corner. Part of it, we touched on this in the Brisbane one, so I don't want to go too far into it. But I'll just remind and let any listeners who didn't listen to that one know that the recommendation of the New South Wales Rugby League's committee was to reduce the number of teams to 12. They were all set on doing that, and then somehow along the way decided, actually, despite these recommendations, let's go to 16 teams, which caused a kind of market panic among off-contract players with a lot of inflated prices and contracts, and very prescient by Norm Tasker, who took over the editorship of Rugby League Week during that year. I'll just read this. The expansion of the competition to 16 teams is going to create problems the league hasn't even thought of yet. Practical things like maintaining enough resolve within new clubs to wear the early difficulties and build. Already they're finding it tough. Players won't sign until the coach has been signed, and the coach won't sign until he knows whether he has enough talent with which to work, setting the trend for the last 30 years of coaching clauses in every contract.
Well, again, go back to the Brisbane Broncos history corner, the formation of the Broncos, and listen to the Gold Coast Chargers. Was it Seagulls or Chargers? Seagulls.
Yeah.
Establishment.
And more prescience by the Rugby League Week, talking about the proposed introduction of a salary cap. Sherlock wrote, "So the New South Wales Rugby League are looking at a salary cap on player payments. If I could just respectfully remind the gents at Phillip Street that similar airy-fairy schemes have been tried in the past. League secretaries are too ambitious, success-hungry, shrewd, and dare I say it, cunning, to ever let that sort of scheme work."
Nothing that ever gets suggested that involves change is ever met with anything but incandescent negativity.
But I mean, they were completely right. Like, what's the longest streak of not having a salary cap scandal? I mean, Canberra did it within a year of the cap being introduced the first time. Then Super League wiped it out for a while, and basically it's every couple of years since we've got it back.
Well, I think you can argue that the comp's been a lot tighter since the cap era.
Yeah. And I definitely am pro salary cap.
It's just the response to every change suggestion is always, get off it. It'll never work,
An interesting thing, and I want you to keep this in your hat because it plays a part in how the grand final played out. But this year they introduced the head bin because of the perceived dangers of concussions. And a leading medical expert was interviewed in the Rugby League Week and said this: "It's a joke and it's dangerous. If a player is seriously injured to the extent he needs 10 minutes recuperation, he should be off the field for the rest of the match. Head injuries need to be observed by qualified medical people, and from what I'm told, this is not happening. Anyway, 10 minutes is ridiculous. I'm dead against it and will fight to have it banned in Queensland." He was a Queensland doctor. "It's only hearsay, mind you, but I'm told some clubs use it to disguise any type of injury. Quite frankly, they're better off doing that than using it for its designed purpose."
Talk about ahead of your time.
And it was really interesting to hear that, hear concussions being talked about in that way, when the narrative has always been we didn't really know the damage they caused, but, now we know. It seems like the medical community at least knew that it wasn't a good thing to be regularly concussed.
Well, I don't think it's the CTEs all new and everything, but I don't think brains rattling around in skulls was new to doctors for 100 years.
Yeah.
But think about this, 1987, they were still having an old trainer hold up 3 fingers and say, how many fingers am I holding up? That was the extent of your head trauma analysis.
Yeah. And the doctor went on to say that the league basically pulled this idea of a head bin where you go off for 10 minutes out of nowhere, not backed by any medical science. They said they had this doctor was on a committee outlining some changes or some ideas to implement to reduce the damage from concussions and the like, and this wasn't one of those recommendations at all. So it doesn't seem to stem from any good science.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was just an interesting little thing, I thought.
It's almost the year of the harbinger, another good Rugby League Digest word.
Yeah. This is a bit of a lightning round of general news, but this was the year that the Channel 10 miniseries, The First Kangaroos, aired. You got to remember, this was the golden age of the Australian miniseries.
I used to love a miniseries.
Bangkok Hilton, Bodyline, etc.
Yeah.
Dennis Waterman, the English actor, played one of the starring roles, and Tony Martin E Street Tony Martin.
Blue Murders Tony Martin.
Blue Murders Tony Martin. He played Dan Frawley. There were a couple of cameos by current players in Wayne Pearce, who played Sandy Pearce, and E.T., who I don't know who he played, but
Brian Bevan.
The first kangaroo. But yeah, so what wasn't well reviewed, Rampaging Roy Slaven actually had a serious review in the Herald where he said, "Unfortunately, the first Kangaroos manages to perfectly avoid both action and drama by being a piece of work that falls between two stools. All the film does is propagate the myth that to be Australian is to be the lovable underdog with superior moral values to our British adversaries. The Kangas are all good men, strong and true. The Brits are scurrilous, underhanded and devious."
Well, that's about right, isn't it?
So I haven't seen this, and I actually tried to see if I could find a copy and couldn't. But I think they must have tried to lean into the bodyline formula and create a narrative that wasn't true to life. But neither Wayne Pearce or E.T. had a speaking role, and E.T.'s only appearance was a topless scene shoveling coal into the ship's furnaces.
But what about? I hope they showed the accommodation in all its ingloriousness.
But I thought I'd get a second opinion. I went to the First Kangaroos IMDb page to see if there were any reviews, and so there was one review which likened the miniseries' humour to Finnish screenwriter Aki Kaurismäki. So high praise.
You want to talk about a niche review? Holy dooly.
One of my favourite aspects of rugby league management in this period and, for the next 10 years or so is their constant desire to class up the game, but they're just meatheads themselves and they don't really understand high culture, but they try to implement it because they think it makes them look smarter.
AKA Yanni.
And this grand final breakfast celebration. I'll just read this from the Sydney Morning Herald. On the eve of what could be a most attractive 1987 grand final, rugby league officials are planning to push the game's image upmarket. This emerged yesterday after the inaugural grand final breakfast, which provided, among other extraordinary scenes, the sight of Slammin' Sam Bacco, the giant Canberra prop forward, sitting with members of the Henley String Quartet, who had played selections from Vivaldi, Mozart, Handel, Dvorak and Strauss in the grand ballroom of Sydney's Regent Hotel.
I think Sam Bacco was the Sam Thaiday of his
era. Yeah. And speaking of two Queensland legends, I thought we'd have a look at the origin of that year because it really opened my eyes up. So this was 1987. Origin was 7 years old. And the narrative I've kind of come to understand is that it's kind of eventually become this, unruly beast that's, eating rugby league despite its success. But it was kind of already like that in 1987. That
was my first Origin that I saw was 87.
This actually got me really angry reading this. Like, this was Sherlock in Rugby League Week talking about the disruption to the season that Origin causes. State of Origin football, I know, makes for a very, very big television event on Tuesday night, but it's doing nothing for our weekends. Watson and I were appalled at the quality of the football last Sunday and rather amazed at the difference a few missing personalities make. It should have been a warning to the powers that be that weekends cannot be left bereft of quality football, as was last week, lest the game become out of sight, out of mind. Like, we've known about the problem for 31 years. Like 3 decades we've known about this problem and done nothing about it.
Inertia.
I'm staggered. I mean, I'm not.
To talk about relitigating, how many times have we gone through the options? It's rock at a hard place.
But have we ever? All we do is move the day. Oh, let's try Thursday. Let's put it Sunday night. We've never addressed the actual problem.
I think we all agree that standalone is the only way.
Yeah, and even more depressingly, it had already all but buried Test football in the public imagination and in the administration. Like the Test against New Zealand, which Australia ended up losing, which for many of the players in that team was the first test loss they'd ever had. That test was played on a Tuesday night, less than a week after an Origin match.
Crazy.
And like Ken Arthursson's comments about international football kind of sum up that mentality. The representative calendar is very heavy next year. There's 3 test series against Great Britain, a bicentenary match between Australia and the rest of the world, as well as the normal program of State of Origin and Sydney country matches. As it stands, there'll be very little available time to fit in the World Cup final.
The World Cup final was an afterthought for him.
But yeah, it's crazy how quickly like Origin just overshadowed everything. I didn't realise it was that sudden.
Neither did I. I mean, I can just still picture the Channel 7 news footage of Sterlo walking through Disneyland. That's all. I know 87 was my first Origin, but I didn't know it was that big until about 93.
Yeah. While we're on the subject of Test football, a major brouhaha was caused by the failure of the league to pay Australian players for Test appearances. And
that's almost like it is now with minnows.
Yeah. But rugby union players were getting a per diem for their tours that was as much as the rugby league players were getting.
Well, they were running a farcical faux amateur setup.
Yeah, but this wasn't even the faux amateurism part. This was like legit amateurism, and their...
Yeah, but I mean, they had to inflate the per diems to make it worth their while.
No, but no, I was more like that's what they're willing to put above the table, like let alone the brown paper bag scenarios. But we talked about in the Brisbane History Corner that Ken Arthurson said the decision of the New South Wales Rugby League in 1987 to allow Brisbane into the team directly led to Super League a few years later. Do you think these comments from 1987 also might have played some part? This was ARL Secretary Bob Abbott. We've never paid our Test players. We consider it a privilege for them to play for Australia. We may declare a bonus to players who have toured, but there's never been any suggestion that we've paid players for appearing in a Test in this country. We pay them expenses, accommodation, and a weekly allowance, but they don't get paid for playing the game. That's an honour.
I mean, God almighty.
And yeah, so players were rightly angry about that situation. I think Gary Jack actually summed it up best. Sure, it's a privilege to play for Australia, but we brought honour to the country and helped make them the best league playing in the country of the world, and they're treating us like this.
Well, it's ludicrous, isn't it?
Yeah. And I wanted to talk a bit about the series as a whole, and I'll start with Wally Lewis, as everything must do. I actually think this is peak Wally Lewis. He was never as high on the chain as this year, and he never would be again.
Maybe 89 in Origin, even though his club wasn't...
I'm not talking about just Origin. I'm just talking about the King Wally factor, right. You know. He was probably already on the downslope of his career here. There was an article that year where Mark Murray came out and said that Wally Lewis has to change his game and maybe he should be playing lock. So there was already talk that he'd had his best time. But
the old rugby league trope about moving guys to lock.
Yeah. But you had this year, you had the book come out. You had the this comment from Wayne Bennett. It shows like where the pecking order was in Queensland football at this time. This was him talking about being reappointed to the Queensland job for 1987. Once Wally said he didn't want it, I thought I was a pretty good chance.
Captain coach.
Yeah.
Fair dinkum.
And June Lewis, Wally's mum, was happy that the crowd were booing him and doing the Wally's a wanker chant again because she was worried the year before they stopped doing it. When they were doing it, she knew that he had his aura back. And I feel that the last reason why I think this was like peak Wally is there was a bit of a mystique in the fact that we in New South Wales only got to see him like 3 times a year.
Absolutely.
And then the tests.
Yeah.
And once he came into the Sydney comp, like I can't really remember the player he was for Brisbane. All I remember is the pantomime villain I used to watch in State of Origin.
Yeah.
But like no one really talks about his Brisbane career as being like great, you know?
Well, it wasn't great. That's why he got the arse.
Mm.
I remember him playing a little bit, but it's just sad that he had to come down at the tail end of the career.
Yeah. Yeah, but it definitely robbed him a bit of that mystique, and that's why I think it was never the same.
It's just amazing to think it was back in 86, 87 that you had Queensland was a whole different competition.
Yeah,
amazing.
This was, of course, the first Origin series for a number of players. One short blonde halfback from Ipswich being among them, and I think Sherlock should have been forever stripped of that name for this comment. The only logical reason I can find for Alan Langer's selection for Queensland ahead of Laurie Spina is a simple one. With King Wally outside, all the Maroons wanted was a feeder inside, just like Mark Murray. Get the ball to Wally and take it from there has been Queensland's motto. Laurie Spina has been an explosive individualist. He would have taken too much emphasis off the King.
Good Lord.
I mean, I love Laurie Spina, but I think history will show.
We're talking about earlier tonight about the toughness of Jeff Tuvey and Preston Campbell. The size of Alfie when he debuted at Origin, unbelievable.
Yeah,
so small. Didn't have that lower body strength that he came to have in his second half of his career.
Yeah, and he won them the series. Like New South Wales won the first game, Queensland squared it up. Alan Lang put in a man of the match performance in Game 3 to give them the series.
That double grubber kick, was that 87?
I think so.
Yeah.
Another interesting thing about the New South Wales Origin team this time, Terry Lamb actually decided to step down from representative football, and the New South Wales Rugby League threatened to ban him for the duration of the Origin period.
Wow.
And he stuck to his guns and said he just family commitments and the rest of it, he just didn't want to play Origin. In the end, the Bulldogs found a loophole to stop him getting banned. After Game 1, when New South Wales won, they waited until all the players got through the week and didn't get injured, and then he made himself available knowing that he wouldn't be picked because it was a winning team.
Right.
So he got to keep playing during the week.
The last-minute loophole in rugby league.
Yeah.
It never fails to get a player out of a suspension. Or.
But I mean, he did play rep footy beyond that. But kind of a little insight into why maybe his rep numbers weren't that great.
If I had to submit a choice for History Corner, I would suggest Terry Lamb. A very interesting career.
Yeah.
The whole longevity, not training.
Yeah.
All the rest of it.
And you also had, not the swan song, because he did referee the first game in 1988, but it was all coming to an end for Barry Gumasol. A lot of talk in the press about how bad he was, and a lot of that coming from the Queensland contingent. Fatty said that he borders on incompetent as a referee. He said he wasn't biased; he was just shit.
What an endorsement!
And the Rugby League Week were out in force saying that it was a joke that he kept getting picked. My favourite story about Barry Gumasol comes from Ken Arthursson's book, where he talks about there was it must have been a Panasonic Cup match between Brisbane and Manly, and Ron McAuliffe, the Queensland boss, selected Barry Gumasol to ref, and Arco said, no, there's no way we're having that, to which Ron McAuliffe said, all right, well, how about this? What about if we give it to Gumasol and I tell him to ref at fair dinkum?
That's in the top 3 ever quotes worldwide, let alone rugby league. Good Lord.
But yeah, so this this was the year that rugby league went to America, and I thought it was very timely to look into this, given everything that's happened over the last year or so. And you gotta remember how big a shadow Paul Hogan cast in that era.
Yeah.
Like, you wonder whether Crocodile Dundee made the league go, well, the timing's right. Australia's hot right now.
You wonder, I guarantee it.
And the league did invite Hogs as well as Greg Norman and Bob Hawke to come over for the game. I don't think any of them made it. But and the eternal trope with any effort like this, there was talk that players were going to wear gridiron pants for the game, to which Rugby League Week columnists like Mark Murray and Ray Price were outraged that they would do that.
But think about the era that was in, where like these were very Aussie blokes before international travel, before globalization. Total Aussie ochre blokes.
Yeah.
They would have been going there like, almost thinking that they'd be stars there in their mind, I reckon.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And I got to say, I think that the way they promoted the game was pretty good. Like, they billed it as a North versus South contest, giving the Americans something to latch on to, and more importantly, giving me my favourite ever Rugby League Week cover with Paul Vaughton and Noel Cleal in Civil War uniforms.
Ultimate cover.
Yeah. The big sticking point was getting the game on TV in America, and
not enough channels.
Yeah. So for months in the lead up to the game, we were hearing that, they're in deep talks with ESPN. It looks like it could be watched by up to 15 million Americans. So this was a game for that was in August. In September of 1987, Norm Tasker in the Rugby League Week wrote this: "The State of Origin match in Los Angeles last month has finally made it on American TV. The cable network ESPN has agreed to show an hour's edited highlights in November." And I wanted to so feeling about the venture was mixed. There was a lot of support, but there was also a lot of questioning as to, is this the time? Is this the priority? Why are we doing this?
You're saying there was some negative feedback on it.
Yeah. So I think Mark Murray outlined his reservations quite eloquently, saying, we got threats from the AFL. What's the follow-up? What's the end goal here? What are we going to do? But I don't want to read like an eloquent kind of, summation of events. I want to hear what Ray Price has to say. "I've heard some arguments for and against this week's State of Origin promotion, but it hasn't changed my mind. The match is a waste of time. Some pockets are going to be filled with money." Just an aside, the league lost $40,000 on it, which is a pretty fair effort.
Yeah, not bad.
They lost about 600,000 this time.
At Parramatta's annual meeting, that'd be a banner year.
"Some Yanks will turn up purely through curiosity to watch the game, and then it will be all forgotten. Rugby League has to look after its own backyard in Australia before they take off on their half-pied fantasy about getting the game going in the US. Aussie rules, like it or not, has invaded our territory. They've moved into league's strongest cities, Brisbane and Sydney, and have made definite moves to set up a truly national competition. Have we made any inroads into their territory? Are we playing any top-class matches outside our own domain? No, we're going to Disneyland."
I think that's quite eloquent.
I think, like, he's kind of on the he's on the money. He was on the money then, and it kind of makes you think now, like, yeah, it's great we're going to America, but when we can't even get a team in Perth, like,
yeah, agreed. But you should better do both. You should better have your backyard.
Yeah,
door.
no, it definitely should be an either-or scenario. But
so in '87, he's predicted the infestation of AFL, the vermin that they are, and then you go down to the Redfern pubs and they're watching Swans at full ball and putting the league on the side TV.
Disgusting. But I think this comment from Norm Tasker really this could have been written last week. "The match has had plenty of knockers, but there's a lot to be said for the old adage, nothing ventured, nothing gained. It's a shame the clubs couldn't share the spirit of adventure embodied in the game. Asking players to rush back virtually as soon as they've showered so they can play a weekend game here is crass."
But, I mean, I've got to agree with Price. Where is the follow-up?
Yeah.
Do it yearly.
Yeah.
Like, do it several times. Don't just do it once every 3 decades.
Exactly. And the official crowd was 12,000. Jack Gibson put it at 5. Paul Vaughton, who played in the match, said it was more like 8 to 10. But, I mean, regardless, like, that's not a terrible result.
Still bigger than Manly.
And why did it just fall away? And there was just nothing more heard about it for 30 years.
I've got to say, Long Beach is a venue. What's the?
Well, I guess it had to be a West Coast thing.
Well, it's a rough as guts joint apparently on the Californian coast. It's like it doesn't seem to be like a rugby league heartland to me.
Is that where Snoop Dogg's from?
Yeah.
Yeah. South Sydney's number one ticket holder.
It would have made a great second rower. Cartwright-esque. John, that is.
Now I want to turn to the broadcasting landscape, and I've said it before. My 3 all-time favourite books: Wuthering Heights, The Grapes of Wrath, and Rex Mossop's The Moose That Roared. And this was a massive year for Rex. Apologies that there's some repeated content from our one of our earliest history corners on Rex Mossop, but I think we had about a dozen listeners then.
Get that on YouTube.
Yeah, definitely. And more importantly, track down a copy of The Moose That Roared.
Best book ever.
It's the greatest book of all time. So this was his return to TV after a few years in the wilderness when Channel 7 lost the rights after the 82 season, I believe. So the broadcasting landscape was in a state of flux in 1987. Before I get to TV, I'll just briefly touch on the radio climate. You had Hollywood and Zorba, the undisputed kings of rugby league radio. This was the year that a 32-year-old former auctioneer from Dundas made his debut as the head of 2UE's radio call. Ray Hadley cementing his spot there. And during the year they ran a story in the Rugby League Week looking at the radio teams and went to sat in with Ray Hadley, and Ray Hadley said this to say about the fact that he was only on air during the games. He wasn't involved in the pre-game stuff. I just think people can hear too much of the one voice. I'm at it non-stop for 80 minutes, and then I do the wind-up after the game for half an hour or so, and that's probably enough of me. I want to know when and why that changed.
Yeah, I'll just work 7 days a week for 12 hours a day from now on.
I got to say, like, as much as like, Ray Hadley, all accounts, prick of a bloke, terrible TV caller, can't stand him. I think if he became a TV caller in 84 or 85, we'd be talking about him as like one of the greats.
Yeah, the only issue with why his TV calling is bad now is it sounds like radio or greyhound calling.
Yeah, I think he just was in that world for too long to actually be able to pull it off on TV.
He's actually quite a fine radio caller.
He's great. Like I think he's a really good football caller on radio.
Give me a bit of nostalgia now for the radio, the Around the Ground, or whatever. I used to listen at my nan's house.
It is funny because it's the ultimate like rose-colored syndrome. Like Around the Ground, Synovus vitamins, like all that sort of stuff. Like listening to the radio and getting the 6 games scores, but like. That's a terrible system, but you look back so fondly.
No one thought to sell the rest of the games for rights, get some money in the game.
So on TV, you had 3 networks sharing the games. You had Channel 10 doing the Sunday night replay. You had the ABC game on a Saturday Arvo, and you had Channel 9 doing Origin with Darryl Eastlake. Think
of how little TV rugby league you had.
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy when you think back.
Yeah.
How we followed the game.
I know. Do you remember how terrible those Sunday games were? Like, the way they were chopped up into, an hour, like...
Well, that was in the Super League War.
But even before that...
Didn't they have it at 90 minutes?
Oh, yeah, it was 90 minutes, but still, it was not the full game.
The worst was the Super League, the 1 hour Sunday.
I know.
That made me want to vomit.
Actually, I think worse than that is the Friday night game being not put on live because of Burke's backyard.
It was a big show at the time.
Speaking of big shows at the time, do you know that the Sunday night big game was actually 3rd in the ratings for much of 1987? It's
a knockout?
No. So 60 Minutes was first, and... a friendly alien from Marmac in second spot. Alf, of course.
I had the Alf doll.
We all had the Alf doll. I love I love the complaining of rugby league people. Like, I think this is the most rugby league quote of all time. This is complaining about the 6:30 time slot, saying it's that's family time. This was Clive Galea. Some of the boys are having trouble convincing wives that rugby league should dominate on television at 6:30 every Sunday night. That's Shirley's family viewing time. At 7:30, Alf and 60 Minutes take over, causing the dedicated fan to retreat to the second set, or even surrender altogether. Mate, I mean, I love my footy, but Alf, come on.
I mean, you always say that rugby league fans can have any excuse to avoid going to a live game. You've got Alf keeping you out of the TV games as well. Is that an early precursor to the pussy whipped husband?
But I love Rex's obliviousness to all of this. This is how he thought the 1987 ratings war went. From our first broadcast of 1987, which went to air at 6:30, we wiped the floor with the best programs the opposition channels could pit against us. But yeah, so of course he replaced Ray Warren that year. Ray Warren had commented for Channel 10 in the years leading up to that. He says that one of the reasons that he thinks he lost his job was he was scared of flying and refused to go to the 1984 Olympic Games, where he was supposed to anchor their coverage. And he said that put him offside with management from thereafter.
Yeah, it's fair enough.
In his book, he said that Jack Gibson told him in the early days of his commentating that your biggest problem is you try to be friends with everyone, and you can't. Jack was saying that my fence sitting came over in my commentary, that it was too sanitised. In other words, I didn't bag anybody because I didn't want any rough water.
Very good advice.
Because I got his book hoping to see some Rex bagging, but he basically didn't say anything.
All right.
Disappointing. Rex, not so hesitant. He said this: the sportscaster I'd be replacing at 10, Ray Warren, was bitter about his axing. We'd always been friendly to each other, and I made it clear there was nothing personal in my taking his job. Channel 10 management had approached me after all. They thought I'd rate better than Ray. It was as simple as that. 10's move was purely a business decision, and I was disappointed by Ray's attitude. I felt no guilt at all at taking his position. We're all big boys, and TV's a tough business.
Imagine if the shoe was on the other foot.
Yeah, I know.
I'd be trying to hit him.
So Rex was under of the understanding when he signed his contract that he'd be alone in the booth because that's how he liked to operate. He thought that other people just got in the way and stepped on his call. But
think about that, a solo call.
Yeah. He used, when he was in the last days of Channel 7, he had Bill Anderson next to him, and he said, I didn't mind Bill Anderson piping up, at halftime, but during the game it was my show. So he was of the understanding that was going to happen, but 10 said, no, Graham Hughes is going to be in the box with you, and that's just kind of how it is. And that almost instantly set up an adversarial relationship between the two of them.
Poor Graham Hughes.
Yeah. And it was pretty much in every rugby league week during the season in 1987, there was at least a small column talking about the feud between Rex Mossop and Graham Hughes, which was like filtering its way on air. I'll just read this one. Those of you who thought Channel 10's mismatched duo of Rex Mossop and Graham Hughes were light-hearted in their many digs at each other should think again. What a lively start to the Panasonic Cup. The Moose, One-Eyed Eagle, came across to us as pretty fair dinkum when he got stuck into ex-Bulldog Hughes. Such things as, Graham who? How nice of you to say so, considering your eyes are blue and white. I should have known better than to ask you. I'm learning, buddy. Were they really as good-natured as they seemed? Hughes and Mossop are of different eras and are on different wavelengths. We'll watch their progress with interest. For his own part, Graham Hughes, in his book, commented on the situation and said, in Rex's heyday, he created atmosphere, he was accurate, he knew all the inside information and the terminology and the strategies. But by the end of Channel 7's tenure, Rex was nearing the end of his career. He had begun making on-air errors. When he joined us at 10, Rex and I disagreed from the start. I stood up to Rex and contradicted him when I thought he was wrong. He did not enjoy this.
Saying that they're from different eras is an understatement. Like, he's from the Rum Rebellion, and then Graham Hughes was from the 80s.
And it was clear that it wasn't a cultural fit with Rex at Channel 10. And Rex said, "There was never any love lost between me and 10 management, who I thought went out of their way to keep their distance. Perhaps they found me a bit difficult. I believe my broadcasts were hurt by too many long ad breaks, and I said so. And I copped flack from the powers that be when viewers saw me throw my papers in the air in anger after learning I may have to be in Seoul for the Olympics at the same time as the 88 League Final Series."
That's the best ever.
I'll say it again. Why was he informed that on air? But also this was this was earlier in Rex's book. 10 Chief George Brown put a solid proposal to me. I'd be sole commentator of the Premiership match of the day on Sunday night, and if 10 won the rights to televise the 1988 Olympic Games, I would be the host.
Oh my God.
This is why this book is the best book ever. Like, he's just got no self-awareness at all.
I can't say this enough to the listeners. Go to the YouTube and listen to Michael's early history calling on Rex Mossop and his book, because it's just so entertaining.
And it sounds like we're bagging Rex here, but like I legitimately love Rex Mossop.
But that quote there is why he is beloved, because he's angry because he's getting what other people would call a chance of a lifetime to go to the Olympics and broadcast, and he's going to miss the league final. He's angry.
And he was copping it from all sides in 1987. Like, the consensus was that he'd lost it as a broadcaster. The Herald seemed to bag him regularly anyway. He hated Fairfax, but regularly in Rugby League Week, every week there'd be an article talking about his latest stuff up, or saying that, comments about his future at 10.
You can't be an aggressive, blustery type and make juvenile errors.
No.
It shines a light on them.
Yeah.
If you like that. So he has to cop it.
Yeah. And this is his way of dealing with that criticism. Critics have attacked me all my life for holding simplistic black and white views, but that's the way it is. Chop a man's head off or don't chop it off, but never leave the poor bastard languishing in irons. I'll give a subject plenty of thought before reaching an opinion on it, but once I've made up my mind, that's it. I won't vacillate. I won't be swayed by contrary opinions. I don't believe in compromise. I believe in what I consider is right. It's a simple philosophy, but it's the Mossop way. And I want to, next time we speak to Ian Heads, I want to ask him about this, because he was still editor of Rugby League Week at this time, and he got a few digs in over the course of that year as well as Rex. And this is what Rex says about people who criticise him. When people turn on me, I don't forget. It hurts me when those I've considered to be friends kick me in the teeth, and there's no shortage of people guilty of that. Many of them very high-profile people in sport, radio, newspapers and TV. So although I'll never lower myself to get involved in a public slinging match with them, there are quite a few people whose actions have ensured that they will have an enemy in me for the rest of their days.
God. I would hate to be an enemy of Rex Mossop.
No. But 1987 was the year that he suffered a stroke on air, and no one knew that at the time. And, everyone was saying like, oh, he's really lost it now. Like, incoherent, didn't know what he was talking about. I don't know what's happened. And the reason it didn't come out that he had a stroke was because he didn't let it come out. And this went back to his playing days of he didn't want to show any sign of weakness.
Think about the toughness of that.
Yeah. He said, I could have called off the Dogs by admitting I had suffered a stroke, but as Dad said, never let the bastards know you're hurt, so I didn't. All my football career I'd played down injury, never letting on when I was hurt. Just as the St George forwards hit me all the harder once they knew that, my present adversaries, those detractors in the media who delighted in highlighting the tiniest mistakes in my commentary, would have really gone to town on me if they felt I was off my game, so I decided not to give them any ammunition.
I think the Mossop way has got some fundamental flaws, like treating everybody that's not you as a bastard, for example.
And having being so immersed in this Walt mentality that you think letting people know that you had a stroke is giving them ammunition. Like, I think Graham Hughes probably would have even sent him a sympathy card if he didn't know.
Absolutely.
And so he was all the rumours about him being removed from commentary were true, and he was stripped of his play-by-play role at the end of that season and went to just kind of like hosting the coverage, which is how I remember him as a kid.
Yeah.
Very kind of bitter about the way that ended, but again, I just love him so much. This was him talking about when he was replaced as the sports reader on the Channel 10 Eyewitness News. A month or so later, after the 1988 Olympics, I was replaced as reader of the Sports Report by Ian Morris. I was told at the time that my rough-hewn, upfront style was putting a lot of younger viewers off. I love the idea of Rex Mossop reading the news.
I mean, he intimidated me as a footy fan. Like, if you're just like switching the channels and see this like 70-year-old aggressive hard man.
So that was the TV landscape in 1987.
It's just another planet, isn't it?
Yeah. So crazy. I neglected to mention Walker the Emu. That was his other big fight with 10 management. They introduced a sideline stuffed emu to the coverage, which he didn't think was befitting of the game.
I agree with Rex.
I also do. I said I have some more Sterlo talk in this history corner, but I think I might save that for next week. So we'll end it there, and stay tuned next week. We're going to look at what happened to the previous season's premiers and look ahead at how Manly and Canberra got to the grand final.
Very entertaining, mate.